So welcome to another episode of TopTenz. I'm your interim host, Karl Smallwood, and today we're talking about 10 creators who hated what others did with their work. And this video is based on an original article by ENDE. Any social links they provided for us can be found below. When you create something, no matter what it is, it's natural to feel possessive of that thing. If it was something that you thought up and brought to life, it's literally yours. And if that thing ends up in someone else's hands, for whatever reason, it's hard to watch that person make changes. Even the most best-intentioned ones. And even the most well-reasoned creator can fall victim to resentment or outright anger if that thing gets altered and adapted in a way they never intended. Once in a while, they even hate what their work became. 10. Roald Dahl hated the Willy Wonka movie. Roald Dahl was what people in modern times, and more specifically Twitter, might call problematic. The writer most famous for his work Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was a known anti-Semite, given to using racial stereotypes in his work and cheated on his wife. But he did write some colourful prose about a kid who finds a giant peach, so that's how most people remember him. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory has been adapted to film more than once now, but the most famous version, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, dates back to 1971, and Dahl was alive to see it happen. Just an aside, does anyone else sometimes call out Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and just use the two terms interchangeably? Also, I know I hit the mic there. I'm not used to this setup. Dahl had a laundry list of issues with the film, starting with the change of the name. He also notoriously disliked Gene Wilder's performance as Willy Wonka, despite most modern audiences finding it to be a perfect performance, especially compared to the much worse performance of Johnny Depp. Dahl hated Charlie in the movie, he hated the film's score, which means he also hated the Oompa Loompa songs, and he hated pretty much all of the changes to the original test. And if anyone's ever gone back and read the original novel, it's not great. The film is the superior version of that work. Oompa Loompa Doompa Da Dee. Number 9. Legendary animator Chuck Jones hated Space Jam. For a group of people, the 1996 Space Jam movie is considered a classic. The melding of real life and classic Warner Bros. Animation captured a lot of imaginations, even if it wasn't a critical darling.
What's going on here?
It also wasn't a favourite of animation icon Chuck Jones. And just another aside here that I'm hoping will endear people to me is that I have a copy of Space Jam on VHS, and because I have to film these on my own, the way I sync up and focus my camera is I place my copy of Space Jam here on my chair precariously, and I focus the camera on Michael Jordan. That's how I've done it since my very earliest days of working on Fact Fiend during the pandemic when my editors weren't here. And do you know what, for the rest of the video, I'm just going to put Space Jam right there. Jones was one of the founders of Warner Cartoons Empire, and along with a team of others, created Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and all the rest of the Looney Tunes. He also wrote and directed many of those classic cartoons over his illustrious 30-year career, working with Warner Bros. From 1933 to the 1960s, which does unfortunately mean he helped work on those World War II propaganda films, but then he also worked on that opera one they did, so I guess it balances out. Jones was once asked of his opinion on Space Jam, something that he'd never actually talked about publicly before. And his answer was unequivocal, saying, in part, "I thought it was terrible." He felt that the story was completely wrong and pointed out that Porky Pig would never say the line, "I think I wet myself." Jones also stated that Bugs Bunny would have never needed help to win a basketball game against aliens from either the Looney Tunes or indeed Michael Jordan, stating that Bugs Bunny, as he wrote him, would have solved the entire film's plot in 7 minutes or less. And if you're thinking that's a pretty bold claim, keep in mind he once shortened a 3.5-hour-long opera into 7 minutes and then won an Oscar. So I think Jones knew what the hell he was talking about. Number 8. Charles Schulz hated the name Peanuts. So you may not think of Peanuts as a franchise that's a big deal these days, but Snoopy, Charlie Brown and the gang have been around for decades and they have made a lasting cultural impact. The estimated worth of the property is some $17 billion, which will buy you a lot more than a few peanuts. The first Peanuts cartoon ran all the way back in 1950, but the creator, Charles Schulz, never planned for it to be known as such. He didn't pick the name Peanuts, had no input on the name, and notoriously hated it. Schulz originally named his comic Lil Folks, and he ran an older strip by that name and wanted to keep it. He thought that that name had some dignity, which was his intention with the comic. The word peanuts to him implied that his comic strip lacked worth, and he thought the name would convey that to audiences reading it at home. The problem was that there was already a comic called Lil Abner when Peanuts debuted, and in the 1930s there'd been a different strip called Lil Folks. Not wanting to deal with the potential legal issues or confusion that would arise, a newspaper editor just picked the name Peanuts supposedly at random and ran with it before Schulz strips were even published and without his knowledge. Schulz hated the name, but there was nothing he could do about it. The newspaper refused to change it, and by that point the name had stuck, so he just wrote and drew thousands of comic strips under the Peanuts name for the rest of his life. And I'm sure, the money helped assuage any concerns that he had. Number 7. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles co-creator Peter Laird hated the fifth turtle. There was a fifth turtle? Venus de Milo. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have been a part of pop culture for over 30 years now, and I apologise to everyone at home for getting the theme song stuck in your head. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Also, fun fact for Americans watching, over here in the UK, it was Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles because censors in Britain objected to the word ninja. Because there was this weird trend in the 1980s and 90s of just not letting ninja themed things on British TV out of fear that it would encourage children to use the similar kind of improvised weaponry that was featured in the show. So Michelangelo didn't have nunchucks in our version, he had a grappling hook called the Turtle Hook. So it's time being known as a goofy children's cartoon. The franchise has its roots as a violent comic book parody of the superhero comics universe, think like The Boys. Along the various iterations and evolutions of the characters, several feature films have been made, various cartoon series, video games, and much more. And somewhere along the way, they even introduced another turtle. At the time the fifth turtle was introduced, Laird did not have any real creative control over the characters and could only offer his opinions. And his opinion is that the fifth turtle sucked, stating that having a female turtle as a core member of the group was creatively bankrupt. He especially hated the idea that they could introduce a new turtle that just so happened to have been there the entire time, was created alongside the other 4 turtles, and that we as an audience just never knew about it. When Laird worked on turtle properties after the creation of Venus, no one was allowed to talk about her. It was actually a rule, and director Kevin Munro said in an interview once that they couldn't even joke about the existence of a fifth turtle around Laird. He just hated the character that much. Number 6. The live-action Dragon Ball movie was so bad it forced the creator out of retirement. So fans and critics alike really hated Dragon Ball Evolution. And I count myself among those haters. To paraphrase that famous Twitter quote, if Dragon Ball Evolution has 1 million haters, I'm one of them. If it has 1 hater, it's me. If it has no haters, I'm dead. And the live-action movie was based on the popular anime Dragon Ball Z. And we're going to use the word based on with massive air quotes around it because almost nothing in that movie is like the original anime. And the hate was felt especially strongly by the original series creator Akira Toriyama, who had actually stopped his series years earlier. After seeing the live action movie though, he was inspired to return to the franchise and start writing new Dragon Ball content because the film made him that angry. He was that mad. He's he did the benefits. Oh, if you don't like it, mate, you're out. And he did. And he made Dragon Ball Super, which kicked so much ass. So the terrible film actually has a pretty decent Silver or Super Saiyan lining. Because, it saved the franchise, which otherwise might have ended years earlier. So yeah, the terrible live-action film forced new content and gave fans what they really wanted. And that is Vegeta with blue hair, which I'm also going to put here next to space. And I wish I had a thing for everything in this list. This pile could just get ginormous. Number 5. Paul Newman once paid for ads to keep people away from one of his movies. Some artists let their hate end with emotion. They'll answer interview questions about how they didn't like this or that, and we'll get an amusing story about it. Not so for Paul Newman. The man was a go-getter, and when it came to things he hated, he put in the effort to make them go away. In 1954, Newman made his acting debut in a movie called The Silver Chalice. In later years, he referred to it as the worst movie made in the entirety of the 1950s. He disliked it so much, in fact, that he went out of his way to get people not to watch it, which arguably backfired on the actor. For example, in 1963, the movie was going to be played on TV, and Newman paid about $1,200 to place ads in a local paper telling people not to watch it. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $12,000. The ad read in part, Paul Newman apologises every night this week. He also apparently screened the movie at his home once for his friends, but he handed out pots and wooden spoons so people could make noise and drown it out during the entire thing. It's safe to say that his dislike was a little tongue-in-cheek, but he really, really was unhappy with the film. And a little bonus fact about a similar story from the annals of pop culture is the Star Wars Christmas special, which George Lucas went on record as saying, and I'm paraphrasing here, "If I had a hammer and time, I would smash every copy of the damn thing in existence," because he hates that bootleg copies keep getting made. And supposedly, only one official copy of the Star Wars Holiday Special exists, and it belonged to the late Carrie Fisher. She reportedly got it from George Lucas himself, who was none too happy to do so, in return for providing commentary on one of the special editions he was making. Carrie Fisher reportedly only screened it when she wanted people to leave her home, because she was, and will always remain, a legend. Number 4. Don Henley hates people covering his music.
Hate the fucking Eagles, man.
Don Henley, the frontman of the Eagles, may not be well known to younger generations, but his influence certainly is. He's behind some of the biggest songs in rock and has been sampled by several more current artists, including Frank Ocean. And it was Frank Ocean in particular Henley had a problem with. Specifically, Ocean's mixtape track American Wedding sampled the Eagles' hit Hotel California, and Henley threatened to sue. He compared Ocean and artists like him to vandals who go into a museum to paint mustaches on other people's art. Henley's threats aren't idle either. He once forced a band to take down a cover they had posted for free of his track The End of Innocence. And again, I have another similar story here concerning one of my favourite creative duos, Daft Punk. They were sampled for a song by will.i.am, and when I say sampled, I mean will.i.am. So around the world, change like the tone a little bit and its tempo, and then while it's playing, has his own voice say over the top, "Believe it or not, this is a remix." And Daft Punk did not like this because it's just our song with will.i.am screaming over it, "This sucks." And they sent a cease and desist to will.i.am. And when they were asked for comment, simply stated, presumably while wearing their robot masks, "We think our music sounds better when will.i.am is not involved." Moving on. Number 3. William Friedkin hated the Exorcist sequel. Legendary Exorcist director William Friedkin passed away, unfortunately, in 2023, and he left behind a legacy of memorable films and equally memorable opinions. Friedkin never minced words and would often tell interviewers about how much he disliked certain actors and films. He was also vocal about his dislike for the sequels to The Exorcist, of which one's being made this year, I think. The first sequel, Exorcist II: The Heretic, featured original actress Linda Blair, but it was received poorly by both audiences and critics for being an all-around awful movie. Friedkin was quoted as calling the movie an abomination and a disgrace. He said he thought the movie was the equivalent to someone taking a novel by Dickens and then turning it into a porno musical, which is a colourful critique and not a very good one because that sounds awesome. It wasn't just the first sequel either. In 2020, when rumours of a new Exorcist were circulating, he took to Twitter to say there wasn't enough money or motivation in the world to get him to go back to the franchise. And I'm having a lot of fun on this one, so here's another aside about a director with a similar but altogether more pragmatic approach to this, John Carpenter. And when he gets asked, like, "So, you know you've made a lot of iconic movies, right?" It's like, yeah, like Halloween, The Thing, a bunch of others. Like, what's the process with, like, you know, these remakes and stuff that gets made of your films? Are you involved? And he says, "Well, my involvement is I hold my hand out and money falls into it. And when enough money falls into it, I sign over my rights and then I leave." And then another great, why not? I'm going to tell you my other favourite quote from John Carpenter because you can't stop me. And if this gets cut out, I'll be so upset. It's a great one. And he was talking to, I think, Guillermo del Toro about The Thing, which was very infamously panned by critics and did not do very well. He was talking to Guillermo del Toro and was like, "You know, The Thing, I know it didn't do very well at the box office, but it really inspired me to become a filmmaker." And John Carpenter looked in the eye and says, "How the f*** does that help me?" It's like, you do you, John Carpenter. You do you. Number 2. Writer Michael Ende hated what they did to the Neverending Story. Michael Ende wrote The Neverending Story in 1979. It became the basis for one of the most beloved and popular fantasy films of the 1980s. A movie that is still beloved today. Beloved by many, but definitely not Ende. And I personally have not seen The Neverending Story, but I do know about the scene, like the horse in, like, the shadow sand pit where it's just a kid screaming at a horse, and like the behind the scenes thing there is like the kid actually thought the horse was dying and his reaction is genuine, which makes like harrowing viewing, unless that's like, you know, just a lie that I learned from another video like this that I probably wrote years ago. Anyway, ENDE was clearly very attached to his work and agreed to a deal with a filmmaker after working out a vision for the movie. He was even promised a high level of control over both casting and production. Things fell apart for ENDE soon after the deal, though. The movie rights were sold to someone else. One day, he received a message asking if he liked the new script, something he'd never even heard about. The new script was something ENDE hated, but the production company threatened to sue him if he hampered production at all. He was left with little recourse. He even tried to sue the filmmakers and felt they had changed the entire story in their new version. He demanded they either stop making the movie or change the name. Neither of those things happened, so he had his own name removed from the credits. What a badass. Number 1. Clive Barker disowned Hellraiser revelation in no uncertain terms. Hellraiser has been one of the most enduring horror movie franchises, right up there with Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street. The first film, written and directed by author Clive Barker, was based on his own short story, The Hellbound Heart, and introduced the world to the character of Pinhead, though Barker never called him Pinhead in his own work. After part 1, though, the movies were actually no longer under the control of Barker, and the franchise grew. And it also grew bad. And towards the end of the franchise's run with the original actor playing Pinhead, Doug Bradley, the sequels were heavily derided, though Bradley's performance was normally singled out for praise. And a fun fact about Bradley, because I'm just going to go on, it's just tangents all the way down in this one. Bradley received numerous credits as a makeup director in a lot of the Hellraiser sequels, because every time they'd make a new one, they just new cast and crew. And the only person who was really familiar with the makeup of Pinhead became Bradley. So he'd normally just apply the Pinhead makeup himself because he was so used to doing it. And as a result, they just give him a credit as makeup director for the Pinhead makeup. Moving on, it became common knowledge that the studio was producing terrible movies on purpose because they needed to make movies to legally retain the rights to the Hellraiser franchise. Big Fantastic Four-stick vibes here. If they didn't make a movie within so many years of the previous film, the rights would switch to someone else. This strategy of churning out films resulted in several notoriously bad movies. The awfulness really seemed to culminate with the 2011 Hellraiser Revelations, which was allegedly filmed in only a matter of weeks and didn't even include the aforementioned Pinhead actor, Doug Bradley, in any capacity. Clive Barker made a very brief statement about the movie on his Twitter account after it was advertised as having come from the mind of Clive Barker. Barker said this in a direct, albeit censored quote, "I have nothing to do with the thing." I'm going to guess that's what he's saying because it's F followed by a bunch of asterisks. If they claim it's from the mind of Clive Barker, it's a lie. It's not even from my butthole. And I appreciate his restraint of saying butthole instead of asshole or arsehole, but then saying as well. You know what? He's a complex dude, but I think that sums up his feelings quite succinctly. So thank you for tuning into this episode of Top 10. I've had a lot of fun doing this one, and as mentioned at the start of this video, unless it got cut, so I'll reiterate here, I am the interim host for Top 10s, taking over for our previous host, Simon Whistler. And while Simon was no doubt a integral part of the success of Top 10s for many years, we have to single out the contribution of the other people who helped make the channel, such as its owner, Shell Harris, now Shannon Harris, and the writers who wrote those articles, which included me. In fact, I think if you go back and look at all the most popular videos Top 10's ever done, they're based on scripts that I submitted. So it's nice for me to be in front of the camera for this one. But either way, I hope people, appreciating my admittedly less polished performance as host. And if you have anything to say about that, you can do so at my socials. You can follow me on my own channel, Fact Fiend. Wiki Weekends, I also help run that one, or just in a comment below. I am looking for feedback on my presentation and hosting style to get it to be more in line with what people would appreciate. But I did have a genuine enthusiasm in this video, and I hope that came across and was not too upsetting or difficult for people to follow, because when I get excited, I talk too quickly. But hopefully that excitement translates to you, the audience, because I had a lot of fun. Either way, like, comment, subscribe, follow the original author, Ian Forte on Twitter, and as always, have the day you deserve. Cheers.